Hey, welcome to the ninth lesson. Throughout this lesson, we will learn how to work with strings in the C++ language. We will cover creating strings, obtaining input from the user, and performing various manipulations on these strings. Before we delve into the study of strings, let's take a moment to explore the history of how this data type came into existence. In the earlier C language, which is the predecessor to C++, there was no dedicated data type specifically for creating strings. Instead, programmers would create an array of characters, i.e., a char array, into which elements or characters were then written. Strings and complete sentences were formed from these sets of characters. In C++, the decision was made to simplify this process by introducing a distinct data type called string. With this type, you can directly create a string or even an entire text. It's important to note that, in essence, any string remains an array of characters, much like it was in the C language. You'll see the practical implications of this as we proceed. First, let me try creating a string using the method that was available in the C language. That is, we can create a char array and name it word. Next, we specify square brackets and indicate that we will have two elements. After that, we assign values in curly brackets. Let the first element be the letter H, and the second element be the letter I. Now, if we use a loop to print these elements on the screen, we will see the word hi. By the way, if you don't specify the number of elements in square brackets, the program will still work, and the number of elements will be determined automatically based on how many elements you write here. Now, let me try to display this on the screen. For this, I will use a for loop. We'll specify that our loop will go from 0 to 2, incrementing the I variable each time. Then, I'll print each element of this array to the screen. If we run the program, we will see a word displayed on the screen. In the C language, this was the only way to describe a string, text, and so on. There was no other convenient data type for describing strings. Here in C++, a separate data type has been introduced, making it much easier for us to work with different strings. To use this data type, we need to include it initially. We include it using the include directive, and this data type is called string. Since I wrote std namespace at the beginning of the code, we don't need to write it before this data type. So, we simply write string. Now, the process of creating a variable is no different from creating a regular variable. Just like we used to create variables of data types like float, int, char, bool, and so on. Here you create a variable in the same format but using a separate type called string. I have created a variable. I can either leave it unassigned or assign it a string. Let me do that. When assigning a value to a string, you must enclose the value in double quotes. In these double quotes, you can write any text you want, and it will be processed correctly. Now I can simply output this variable to the screen. Let's run it and make sure our text is displayed. Of course, this way of writing strings is much more convenient than the previous one in the C language. Now that you know that any string is essentially an array, and understanding it as an array means you can access any element of that array. Let's access our string as if it were an array because, in fact, it is an array. I'm accessing the 0th element by index, which is the first letter of our word. Let's change the value of our first letter. Let it be the letter C. It's important to understand that, in this case, you need to provide a specific character as the value. If I run the program now, you'll see that the first letter of our word has changed. So, when working with strings, remember that any string is an array, and accordingly, you can access and manipulate any element of this array. And finally, let's consider a way through which we could receive a complete string from the user. We will be getting a string and placing it in our variable words. For this, we use the same construction we are already familiar with. That is, we write the input function from the keyboard and specify the variable where we store the data. I'm storing the data inside the variable words. So, let's run the program, and I'll enter some string in the console. After that, press enter, and you'll see that the same string we entered is displayed on the screen. Well, that's how strings are implemented in C++. As you can see, this language has taken a significant step forward from C. It's not for nothing that it is considered an improved version of the C language. In principle, our lesson is coming to an end. I hope you enjoyed it, and if so, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you all, and goodbye.